The humidity at Willow Creek Estate was thick enough to choke the manicured hydrangeas, but it was nothing compared to the stifling atmosphere of my parents' weekly BBQ. As a research coordinator, I tend to look for patterns, and the pattern of the Vance family has always been centered around one person, my younger sister, Chloe. She stood near the grill, glowing with the sort of effortless radiance that only the golden child can maintain while unemployed and living at home. Then she dropped the bombshell. Amidst the smell of charring brisket, Chloe announced her pregnancy. The celebration was instantaneous. My mother, Margaret, wept tears of Christian joy, and my father, Robert, beamed with corporate pride. But then the pattern shifted. Chloe turned her wide blue eyes on me. In front of the entire gathering, including my brother-in-law David Thorne, she asked if I would be a dear and hand over my wedding venue, the Sapphire Pavilion, for her own nuptials. She claimed she was too overwhelmed to plan anything new and that the space was simply too beautiful to pass up. Mark Sterling, my fiancé, stiffened beside me. We had waited 3 agonizing years for a Saturday opening at the Sapphire Pavilion. It was the architectural crown jewel of the city, and as an architect himself, Mark had his heart set on it. "I'm sorry, Chloe," I said, my voice firm despite the trembling in my hands. "But no, we've waited a long time for this. You aren't having my venue." The reaction was seismic. Chloe burst into theatrical tears and fled toward the main house. My mother, Marguerite, instantly rounded on me, her face contorted. "Elena, you've waited 3 years," she hissed. "Would it have unalived you to wait a few more months? When has your sister ever asked you for anything?" I stood my ground, but the air felt thin. Mark finally snapped, his British reserve vanishing as he gave my parents a look of pure ice. We left before he could truly tear them a new one, retreating to the relative sanctuary of our apartment at Skyview Towers. The fallout was immediate. My phone buzzed with a call from Chloe, who sobbed that I always got what I wanted and that this one small favor would have meant everything. Then David Thorne called. Surprisingly, the Scottish stockbroker was apologetic. He had told Chloe not to ask, and he was livid that she had cornered me. He warned me that she was now blaming me for ruining her marriage before it had even properly begun. Then came the texts from my father. "I hope you are happy, Elena. Your sister hasn't stopped crying since yesterday." By Tuesday, Mark and I had reached our limit. We officially removed Chloe from the bridal party, replacing her with my favorite aunt. We even debated barring my parents entirely. The situation escalated further when Marguerite took it upon herself to call my future in-laws, Arthur and Evelyn Sterling. She actually suggested to them that it would be best for Chloe to take the venue because of the pregnancy. Arthur, a retired surgeon with zero patience for manipulation, reportedly told my mother to F off in the most eloquent way possible. He warned her they were going to lose their daughter if they didn't stop playing favorites. Now my mother was crying too, calling my father-in-law a buttface, while Robert sent more scorched earth texts. It felt like a bad soap opera set in Metropolis. Arthur and Evelyn drove over to Skyview Towers that evening, armed with a vintage Bordeaux and a homemade lasagna. "We are your safety net, Elena," Evelyn promised, her interior designer's eye already looking for ways to make our wedding even more spectacular. But Chloe wouldn't stop. She sent a massive text about family values and how selfish I was. I finally broke my silence. I reminded her of every birthday I had to share because she'd throw a tantrum if she didn't get presents too. I reminded her of the job applications I filled out for her because she was too lazy to write a CV. But the Northridge Institute of Technology graduation was the final straw. I wrote, "Remember when you wore the most expensive dress Mom and Dad could buy? You made a cake for yourself, hung balloons for yourself, and forced your way into every single one of my graduation photos because you couldn't handle me having the spotlight for one day. I am done being your doormat. Find another hotel for your last-minute wedding." Her response was a chillingly brief, "Wow, you must love me very much." Then she blocked me. She unblocked me the next morning only to forward a message from my wedding planner. The message read, "Hello, dear. I got the message from your mother and will proceed with the rebooking of the venue on the spot. However, this will have extra costs. Please come by my office to sign the new contract." The audacity of my mother trying to commit contract fraud left me cold. I immediately called Julian Vance, my older brother and a sharp attorney in the Ironport district. Julian wasn't surprised. He confessed that he'd moved to Ironport specifically to get away from our parents' toxicity. He told me Mom had been spreading a story that I had offered the venue to Chloe before the BBQ and then humiliated her in public. I reached out to my actual planner, Penelope Hart of Heart and Soul Planning. She was horrified. "I haven't spoken to your mother since the day you booked," Penelope assured me. She confirmed that no changes could be made without my physical presence, but she immediately offered to hire security for the wedding day at a reduced rate. The battle moved to social media. Chloe began a brigading campaign on Facebook, painting me as a heartless sister who was causing her prenatal depression. Her friend, Tiffany Brooks, led the charge, sending me vitriolic messages. I blocked them all, but the harassment turned physical 2 days ago. I walked out to the Skyview Towers parking lot to find my car covered in broken eggs. Thankfully, my neighbor in Unit 4B, Mrs. Martha Gable, saw the whole thing. Martha is a 75-year-old retired Baptist lady whose hobby is monitoring the street from her window. She identified Tiffany Brooks and another of Chloe's friends immediately. I called the police, and Martha gave her statement with a grim sort of relish. After a week of silence, my parents finally reached out. They asked if we could talk things out at our apartment. I was wary, but Mark and I agreed. When they walked through the door of our Skyview Towers unit, Marguerite's eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. For 10 whole minutes, I actually felt a pang of guilt, wondering if I had been too hard on them. Then Robert spoke, and the illusion shattered. They weren't there to apologize. They were there to negotiate how I could make it up to Chloe for the trauma of the police report and the venue refusal. The air in the room tasted like stale disappointment, a bitter residue left behind by their suffocating presence. I watched the dust motes dance in a stray beam of sunlight, realizing that my family ties were merely a collection of cold, empty walls. Standing in my own living room, looking at the 2 people who were supposed to protect me, I realized David Thorne was right. My sister was not just the golden child, she was a vacuum, and my parents were her willing fuel. I looked at Mark, then back at them, and realized that my safety net didn't include the people who shared my last name. It included the people who actually showed up with lasagna and legal advice when the world turned gray. The golden child had finally pushed too hard, and the pedestal was beginning to crack. But I wasn't going to be the one to catch it when it fell. I had a wedding to plan at the Sapphire Pavilion, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care if Chloe had a cake of her own or not. She wouldn't be there to eat it. The air in my Skyview Towers living room was thick with a suffocating tension as we sat through an agonizingly awkward silence. There were no medical histories to discuss, no sudden diagnoses to blame for the behavior of the people across from me, only the cold reality of years of resentment. Mark Sterling, ever my rock, sat beside me, his presence the only thing keeping me grounded as we began the grim business of dismantling my relationship with my parents. Robert Vance, looking every bit the corporate executive, even in his casual wear, was the first to break. He asked us with forced confusion why we had canceled the caterers they had so generously offered to fund. Mark didn't miss a beat. He responded calmly, explaining that we simply didn't want anything hanging over our heads. No debts, no leverage, no strings that could be pulled at the last minute to center Chloe again. My father's face flushed crimson as he acted offended, claiming he would never use money as a weapon. "Better safe than sorry, Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Margaret Vance, usually the poised philanthropist, bristled. She called me disrespectful, her voice trembling with that practiced fragility she used whenever I stood up for myself. I didn't back down. I told her that the real disrespect lay in everything they had done over the last few weeks, prioritizing Chloe's whims over my milestone. The argument inevitably spiraled back to the venue. My father leaned on his favorite crutch, the tired "it doesn't matter where you get married, only who you marry" speech. It was a classic Vance platitude, designed to make my desires seem shallow. I finally gave him the comeback I'd been holding in for years. "Yes, Dad, exactly. But isn't it fascinating how that logic only applies to me?
As long as Chloe is marrying David Thorne, the location doesn't matter, right? So why is her dream more valid than my reality? The room went tomb quiet. My father looked like a fish gasping for air on a dry dock, his face a deep, alarming shade of tomato red. My mother began that familiar, silent weeping into her handkerchief. I sat there, arms crossed, waiting for a logical reasoning that I knew was never coming. Finally, Robert slapped his hands against the coffee table and launched into a rant about family sacrifices. He spoke of how a loving family should do whatever it takes to make each other happy. Like how you tried to make me happy on my graduation day? I countered, my voice dripping with the memory of that afternoon. You remember, right? The time Chloe smashed my cake into the floor because the limelight wasn't on her for 5 minutes, and you told me I was being sensitive for crying about it? Silence returned, heavier than before. Margaret whispered, "Why do you hate us so much, Elena?" I could ask you both the same thing. They knew they had messed up, but admitting it would require a level of self-reflection they hadn't practiced in 30 years. Instead, Margaret tried to guilt-trip me, claiming Chloe was miserable and hadn't left Willow Creek Estate because of how people were judging her. Robert added that my little sister just needed more time and attention because she was the youngest. It was the same old song, a blatant excuse for her narcissism. I told them directly that their favoritism was no longer something I would ignore. My mother tried to offer the standard lie, that they loved us both the same, but I was done with the gaslighting. I pulled out my phone and opened a list I had been compiling. It was a chronological record of every time they had sacrificed my well-being for Chloe's ego. Dates, specific quotes, and situations. It was a long, damning scroll of neglect. By the time I finished reading, they looked horrified, beaten, and near tears. They tried to start explaining again, but I cut them off. I told them the conversation was over. Either they committed to family counseling and a genuine apology, or they were officially uninvited from the wedding. They left without another word and didn't call for weeks. In the aftermath, I became the villain in the family narrative. I was blamed for Chloe's depression and the fact that David Thorne was reconsidering their relationship. It got so bad that I had to block their numbers and eventually change my contact information entirely. Chloe and her entourage, led by Tiffany Brooks, who thrived on the drama, began harassing me on social media. I eventually deleted my accounts to find peace. It was a mentally draining period, but Mark's family and my brother Julian were there every step of the way. A few days before the wedding, my nan, Beatrice Miller, showed up at my door. She was 82 and still had that library quiet authority. We had a long, tearful talk in my kitchen. She still didn't quite grasp why I wouldn't just move my date for Chloe, but she apologized for the pressure. She just wanted to be there for me. We hugged, though I knew our relationship would take a long time to truly heal. The bachelorette party was a needed reprieve. We spent the night cooking until dawn at Skyview Towers, creating a feast that tasted like joy. Mark even surprised me by practicing his baking skills, putting together a beautiful 3-layered trial cake that put Chloe's past tantrums to shame. Then came the wedding day. The morning at the Sapphire Pavilion was breathtakingly calm, the Metropolia skyline shimmering in the distance. We were taking pre-ceremony photos when I saw a familiar car tearing up the drive. My heart sank. One of my bridesmaids, Sarah Jenkins, saw it too and immediately sprinted towards the security team we had hired. Chloe stepped out of the car, looking disheveled and possessed by a singular, frantic rage. She started screaming obscenities before she even reached the grass, calling me a filthy bitch and blaming me for David Thorne finally breaking up with her. In that moment, looking at her, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. She was a hollow shell of a person who had never been told no. The morning sprinklers had just finished, and the earth around the pavilion's flower beds was a thick, dark mud. Chloe, in a fit of literal madness, bent down to grab a handful of muck, clearly intending to ruin my dress. Before she could throw it, Sarah Jenkins, my marketing manager and fiercest friend, sprinted forward like a linebacker. She pushed Chloe back, and my sister landed squarely on her rear in the middle of the muddy begonias. The security guards arrived seconds later and escorted her off the property. That incident gave me all the ammunition I needed to file a restraining order. I didn't want a public trial, I just wanted her to stay away from my life. The rest of the day was nothing short of spectacular. I married my best friend, my rock, and my favorite architect. Julian walked me down the aisle, his eyes misting as he handed me over to Mark. We both cried through our vows. Of course, a small part of me missed my parents, but the void they left was filled by the people who actually loved me. The celebration was legendary. Mark and his groomsmen had choreographed a hilarious routine to a Taylor Swift song that had everyone roaring, and the speeches from the Sterling family felt like a professional stand-up set. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was the center of a celebration because I was loved, not because I was being accommodated. When we returned from our honeymoon, I knew I needed a clean break. I didn't want to lose my friends, but the air in Metropolia felt tainted by the Vance name and the endless cycles of drama. I applied for a research coordinator position at the Northridge Institute of Technology in a city several hours away. We're currently in the middle of the move, packing up the life we built in Skyview for something entirely new. But the biggest change, the most beautiful cliche, is that I'm pregnant, a honeymoon baby due in the spring. I only hear about my family through the grapevine now. Chloe moved back into Willow Creek Estate, still refusing to work and telling anyone who will listen that I doxed her and ruined her life. Nan told me recently that Robert and Margaret look exhausted. Chloe is behaving like a toddler again, and with no one else to blame, they're the ones who have to deal with the monster they created. They reach out occasionally, sending hollow apologies via email, but I haven't replied. I can truly say I am happy. It hurts to lose the family you thought you had, but at the end of the day, cutting out toxic people was the only way to finally breathe. I'm looking forward to the spring, to a new city, and to raising a child who will never have to wonder if they are enough.